Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest chapter of Ars Magica, taken from the subreddit HFY. All the relevant links are down below, and please like, comment, and subscribe like any good minion of the algorithm would do. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 19.5. The helicopter lurched, and something rattled. Donaldson slowly opened his eyes, unconcerned by the Black Hawk's occasional shuddering interrupting his nap. The Kishman across from him, however, was very concerned. As much as he is trying not to be, Donaldson gave him a courtesy of pretending he didn't notice, and shifted his gaze to the window next to him. Below, and then beside them, loomed a vast range of snow-capped mountains, bleak and inhospitable. The ragged terrain stretched as far as the eye could see. He watched a gust of wind roll across the craggy terrain, blowing flurries off the peaks. A few moments later, the helicopter rocked again. The Kishman inhaled, tensing, his ears pressed flat against his skull. "Relax, Lord Shinya," the middle-aged woman to Donald's right said, leaning forward in her harness. "It's just a little turbulence. It's like hitting a small bump in a carriage." "It's not like that at all, Ambassador Grayson. Despite the exigency of its speed, I disagree with its method of transport in its entirety." "Axion, try looking at the wonder of it," Grayson said, leaning forward with a smile. "You're sitting in a chair, in the sky." "Exactly," the Kishman growled through grit teeth as the Black Hawk jostled again. "If any of the gods above us have desired for Kishman to fly, they would have given us wings." "Relax, Ambassador," Donaldson said, shifting a bit to find a slightly more comfortable position to resume his nap. "It's perfectly safe." "How can you sleep, Major?" Donaldson could hear the Kishman ambassador's incredulous expression. "We ain't sideways," he said, his eyes still closed. "He's been throwing a hissy fit the whole damn flight." "I imagine this is fairly a calm flight for what he's used to," Grayson said. "Nobody shooting at us, after all." Donaldson replied with a grunt. "Ma'am," one of the gunners said, "I respectfully request that you not jinx us." "Major Donaldson," the pilot's voice called over the intercom, "we've got elves below us." "Say again?" Donaldson sat up, adjusting the headset he wore, thoughts of returning to his nap gone from his mind. The gunner muttered a curse. "We have visual on what looks like a squad of elves on the ridge off our port side." Shifting in his seat, he leaned forward to get a better view of out the window. "I see him, squad of elves, 2 o'clock. Looks like they're barely clinging to that ridge." "Permission to engage them, sir?" the specialist in the port gun asked, reaching for the handle of his small door. "Not at this altitude," the pilot said. "Warrant Hendricks," Donaldson said, settling back into his seat. "Call it in, mark their position. Maybe our escorts can drop something on them." "Yes, sir," Hendricks replied, followed by a click of the pilot switching channels. "There is no way that they haven't seen us," Grayson said, looking at Donaldson. "Won't they report back?" He shook his head. "Over that terrain, it'll be weeks before they get anywhere to report anything." He leaned forward to look at you, sitting at the other side of Grayson. "First Sergeant, make a note of their location. We'll want to pass it on the Dolgra." "Yes, sir," you replied. As a senior enlisted advisor called the pilot for their coordinates, Donaldson settled back into his chair to resume his nap. Hendricks's voice cracked over the intercom. "Everyone up, we're beginning our descent." Donaldson started to wake, pulled from a disjointed dream about his Mima throwing a hissy fit over a hurricane of Swedish fish disrupting her funeral. Blinking away the image of his uncle trying to convince her the candy fish was actually a barbecue sauce, he leaned over and looked out the window. Below, the craggy, snow-capped mountains had been replaced with lush fields and forest, interwoven with rivers and streams. In the distance, smaller mountain ranges tapered to rolling hills and valleys. Everything was covered in a vibrant green. "We're below 10,000 feet. Clear to open doors." The gunners immediately unlatched and slid open their windows, then swung their guns into position. "Shouldn't be needed, but good to be prepared, just in case," he thought as he reached forward to unlatch his side door and slid it open. Shinya pinned himself against his seatback, eyes closed, ears flat against his skull as the air rushed into the cabin. On the opposite side, Yu opened his door. Donaldson looked out across the verdant land below, appreciating the view. Donaldson glanced back, giving a slight nod of approval at the wedge of the Black Hawks and Chinooks shaking out into a crisp formation behind them. "Major, have them keep their guns in, please," Grayson said, holding her headset mic close to her mouth. "We don't want to look like we're rolling up for a fight." "And if they start shooting at us, ma'am?" he asked, turning around to look at her. "We fly away and land somewhere else." "Yes, ma'am." He glanced up towards the cockpit. "You catch that, Hendricks?" "Yes, sir." "Then pass on the word. Maintain all guns stowed." "Yes, sir. Guns in." The line clicked again, and he switched channels, and the gunners land-latched their mounts, swinging the weapons back inside. "Thank you, Major," Grayson said, giving him a nod. "Until we get shot at, you're in charge, ma'am." The line clicked again. "Target in sight, looks clear, plenty of room, making approach." Jonathan nodded. "Give the signal." "Yes, sir." He stuck his head out the door. From a black hawk behind him, he could see a young artificer shoot out several long flares of color, repeating the Gannon signal call pattern for friends approaching. Nodding in satisfaction, ahead of them, a large manor commanded well-maintained field, screened by small but thick strands of trees and hedgerows. Gannon banners flew above it. The terrain below had shifted to urban streets and buildings, part of Dulgra's sprawling capital city. They were low enough now that they could see the locals falling in pandemonium as alien creatures fled inside or raced away from them. "They're fecking around," Specialist Sailor said, looking out of his gun port. "Keep those thoughts to yourself, Specialist," Hugh growled. "Yes, please," Grayson said. "Copy that, mouth shut." Sailor made a zipping motion over his lips. "LZ is clear," Hendricks called. Donaldson looked up towards the cockpit. "Take us down." With a thundering roar, a dozen helicopters settled into the field that constituted the Gannon Embassy western front yard. Donaldson hopped out as soon as the Black Hawk's wheels were on the deck. The Helo's crew chief exited on his heels and quickly took up post to ensure nobody walked into the whirling tail rotor. "Lieutenant Miller, take your platoon and you're all set up in the perimeter," he shouted over the deafening drone and whirring blades. "Yes, sir." Ch.19.5 clambered out of the helicopter behind Donaldson, stumbling to the ground in a haste to exit the vehicle. On his knees, he bowed his head, clutching at the ground for a moment before he regained his composure and pushed himself back to his feet. "Poor bastard. Looks like he wants to kiss the grass. Impropriety is probably the only thing keeping him from doing it." "Sergeant, take the ambassadors and their staff to the center of Al-Z. Everyone else, you'll start unloading." Turning back to the manor, he spotted a commotion as a contingent of guards scrambled to respond to their arrival. Behind him, the whirling thunder shifted to a chest-thumping thrum, then started spooling down as the pilots cycled off their engines. He stepped around the Black Hawks as the column of guards arrived. They quickly formed ranks and in a crisp, well-drilled motion presented their halberds. Behind them, more guards rushed to reinforce them, piecemeal. "Ambassadors, you're up!" Donaldson called over his shoulder, calmly resting his thumb on the safety of his rifle, just in case. Ch.19.5 and Grayson appeared from behind the helicopter together as the signals artificer sent up their last friends approaching flare. "That's Kid's motivated at least, I'll give him that much." The Keshman noble stepped forward, ears locked back in a regal sweep, with bold and unwavering confidence. He walked right up to the guard captain. "I am Lord Axion Ch.19.5, son of Grand Count Hyan Ch.19.5 Kremlane. I bring tidings and news from the kingdom and the war, and I bear the king's seal." "This is incredible." Ambassador de Senae's hands lifted towards his head before he brought them back under control and returned them to the ornate conference table in the center of the embassy's so-called green room. "Not that there's anything actually green in here," Donaldson thought. "Unbelievable," the young Lynae continued. "And yet the proof sits there, plain as the sun, on the front lawn." He shook his head. "We have been out of contact with the kingdom for so long. We had begun to fear the worst, and now—" He stopped, turning back to Grayson, his ears flicking back. "Another world? Truly?" She chuckled. "Trust me, Ambassador, I didn't believe it when I first heard the portal opened either." "She speaks better Guyani than half of the Kishmen we brought with us," Donaldson thought. "Sounds as fancy as this room." "I didn't believe it, and I was one of the lords who championed this project." Ch.19.5 flicked an ear. "But it is true.
We have opened a portal to another world. At first we thought to simply save what of our people we could, but instead we found a new friend." The Lord gestured to Donaldson, and he gave a small nod in return. "Willing and able to see Ganlon restored, and the elves thrown back from whence they came." DeJournet's ears flicked back, and Donaldson could almost feel his gaze as the ambassador examined him and Grayson with a shrewd scrutiny. "Still," he said, his brows shifting together by a fraction of an inch, "as incredible as that is, I have been in this game for too long to believe the generosity you said you show without disinterest. No nation acts so selflessly." His eyes locked onto Grayson. "There must be something you seek to gain from this." "There is," she said, meeting his eyes and giving him a small nod. "A secure border, for one. We would very much like rather to have Ganlon as a neighbor than the Asanamne Empire." DeJournet snorted. "I should think so," he flicked an ear. "Still, with the might you seem to have, you could easily have taken our side of the portal, rooted out the control device and destroyed it, rendering it point moot." "Ambassador," she frowned, considering her words, "to be completely honest, there are some people in our government who have argued that we should do just that." She shook her head. "But they are a very small minority, and, to be honest again, a lot of our motivation is economic in interest. Until the portal opened, we did not think magic existed. The notion was ludicrous. Yet here you are, able to do things that we thought the realm of pure fantasy, as an everyday occurrence. If we could learn to master your magic and combine it with our existing science and technology, we could achieve wonders that neither of us could have imagined. The potential for advancement, the economic opportunities, and the wealth of power that come with them are a big motivator for us." "I see," the old Kishman nodded. "And I can imagine the incredible opportunities for us in return." "Of course," Grayson said. "But that's not all of it. There is more you seek." She shook her head. "Ambassador DeJournet." She leaned forward. "You have to understand, we are the only people on our world. There are a few animals that we think might be close to achieving sapience. In time, maybe with our help. But humans are the only people on Earth, and we have been for all of our recorded history. There were cousins of modern humans that existed in our prehistory, but in my understanding, they were closer to us than you are to the Kalamane, and they did not survive prehistoric times. For a very long time, we thought that we might be alone in the universe. And now, here you are, on this whole new world, with not one, not two, but 5 distinct species, all on one planet. We've long dreamed of finding new friends amongst the stars, and now here you are, and desperately in need of help that we can easily provide. A few of us might caution against it, and there are always elements of fear in the new and unknown. But as a people," she shook her head, "we could never shut that door." "That is very compelling, Ambassador Grayson, very—" The main door swung open, cutting him off. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Grace. My lords, my lady," the embassy guardsman said, bowing to each in turn, his ears low and humble. "There is a garrison of Queen's Own in the compound gates. Their commander states that they are ready to assist Ganlon in the defense of its embassy." "That was faster than I expected." DeJournet flicked an ear. "Master Jun, give their commander my thanks and appreciation, but please inform him that we are not under attack, and that his assistance is not required. We have just received word of new allies, and I'll be dispatching an envoy to request a meeting with the Queen at her earliest convenience." "As you say, my lord," the guardsman bowed, then straightened. His ears flicked back with a military precision as he performed an about-face and marched from the room. The attendant outside closed the doors behind him. With a mildly amused ear flick at the door, DeJournet returned his attention to Grayson. He tilted his head, his ears twitching to the side. "There is something more, I believe." She nodded. "Yes." She took a deep breath. "We have been alone on our world, but we have not always been united. We still aren't." "Nor were we, until the elves killed anyone who hadn't rallied with Ganlon. Yes, well, we don't like to think about it much, but we've done some pretty terrible things to ourselves in our past," she sighed. "If we're honest with ourselves, we're still doing some pretty terrible things to each other today. Though I think that we can objectively say we've become a lot better as a whole than we used to be, despite the lingering dark spots. We've seen what the elves are doing before, in the darkest moments of our history," she frowned. "We don't always live up to our ideals as a nation, and politics often limit the actions that we can take. but we fought this kind of evil before." She shook her head. "There is no making peace with it." "I see," he quirked near at her, and she smiled in return. "Thank you for your honesty." "Well, that was a lot more passionate than most diplomacy I've sat in on." Janae took a breath and turned the other Gandan ambassador. "Lord Shinya, you said you bring news. How fares the kingdom?" "Gandan still lives," Shinya flicked an ear. "Though just 4 months ago we thought that it wouldn't for much longer. Before we opened the portal, we were losing the war, and badly. Half the kingdom was in Elven lands. The royal host was smashed to pieces, the only few banners that remained. But now the enemy has been pushed back. Our army marches through regions that they haven't set foot on in years, and our human allies continue to drive deep into occupied territory with little resistance. For the first time since Conwoyel fell, there is real hope of victory." He flicked his tail, and an aide lifted a large sack, placing it on the table. "We bring mail." He reached into his own satchel, "including some personal letters for you, my lord." He passed the packets across. Struggling to maintain composure, Janae reached for them. Even Donaldson could read the spike of apprehension and hope that shot through him. "Your sister and her family are alive and well. They left Milan as soon as the war broke out. In fact, the whole town was abandoned, as close to the border as it was. They had to flee the Elven advance more than once, but they did make it to the capital, and have been staying with your cousin, Lord Brunlin, for 2 or 3 years now. It's not all good news, I'm afraid, but Shinya smiled. You are our great-grand-uncle now. Ha! The older Kishman pricked his ears and tucked the packet of letters into his jacket. Thank you, Akshan. The younger Kishman nodded, then pulled out a much fancier document with an ornate seal. I also carry your new orders, an instruction to meet the king's desires and the interests of the kingdom. He handed the envelope over, and after a brief inspection, Janae broke the seal and opened the letter. The official document contains the fine details, but the general substance is that I am to be your relief. His Majesty is quite pleased and satisfied with your service, and wishes to welcome you home with the full honors. What? My relief? Now? Shinya held up a hand. In time. His Majesty, young as he may be, is no fool. I cannot hope to match your knowledge and standing amongst the Queen's court at this moment. But one of the new tasks of the embassy is also to facilitate the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States of America and the Dolgra Kingdom and Cities Alliance. And it is to support the endeavor that I've been working on with Ambassador Grayson and her colleagues. I am to take up station here as junior ambassador to the Dolgra Crown for a year, or until such a time as which you are confident in my ability to manage the situation in its entirety. I see, Janae said, continuing to scan the opening page of the document. We can certainly accommodate that. He glanced at the next page, then up at Donaldson. I take it by your presence, Major, and the size of the contingent you brought with you, that you are here to do more than just serve as an embassy guards. That is correct, Ambassador, Donaldson nodded. My men and I are here to serve as military advisors, conduct direct reconnaissance and observation of the disposition of elven forces on the Dolgra front, and to act as liaisons, coordinating long-range tactical strikes in support of the Dolgra operations. The old ambassador nodded. Very good. I shall have my staff arrange an introduction for you to the Queen's generals. He rolled an ear. The Dolgra are proud and often obstinate people, and they will stand on ceremony when it suits them. But they know when to pull the formality aside and drive ahead without delay. If what you have parked on my front lawn is any indication of your capabilities, I'm sure that they will be most eager to meet you. Receiving a nod from Donaldson, Janae turned back to Grayson. You'll find that we have plenty of rooms available to accommodate you and your staff, my lady, including your soldiers. This estate was built to fully accommodate the visit by the king himself. I'll have rooms prepared for you. He flicked his tail, and an attendant departed. Donaldson reached up and keyed his radio. Galahad 2, this is Galahad Actual. Stand by on setting up tents and gear. We're being put up inside the embassy proper. Over. The radio squawked with a reply. Galahad Actual, this is Galahad 2. Copy all. Out. Leaning back in his chair, he froze as he realized nearly every Kishman in the room was staring at him. Ah, right. You all ain't seen that yet. And you say you don't have magic, Janae said, his ears still locked on Donaldson. Grayson chuckled. Not magic at all. It's a machine. Incredible. The old ambassador stared at Donaldson for a moment longer, then rolled his ears and shook his head. I shall have to inquire more of your technology later. He looked down at the papers in his hand, glancing across them. He flipped through a few more pages, then stopped at the final page. His ears shifted, and he stared at the scrawled signature and royal seal. He flicked an ear at Ch.19.5. And how is our new king? Ch.19.5 glanced at Grayson and Donaldson. As I said, he is young, but he's no fool. And now that he has reached his majority, the main door swung open again, and the same guardsman rushed in, his ears flat against his skull. Your Grace, I apologize again for the interruption, but the Queen's voice reports that Her Majesty's earliest convenience is, now? Above and below, I told you, Dulgra, stand on ceremony, but brook no delay when the time strike the iron. He waved at the attendant. Summon the stable master, we shall need 2 carriages, post-haste. Spare the finery. You misunderstood, Your Grace, Master Jun said, his ears swinging low, then back. The Queen's carriage is at the gate. She is requesting entry to the grounds, and that you attend her immediately. No delay, indeed, Ch.19.5 said. Major, Grayson said, eyeing the ACUs and plate carrier, how quickly can you change into your dress uniform? They are fecking around, Donaldson muttered, owning a glare from you as a fuzzy grey ball the size of a gorilla with arms and legs to match it walked in. Well, mostly a match. Instead of walking on its knuckles, it walked on its palms, and 4 thick fingers splayed out of balance. Sir, we just yelled at the men for that, you grumbled. Actually, that's technically a compliment, Grayson whispered, but keep it to yourself. Yes, ma'am. Her Royal Majesty, Queen of Dulgra, Suzerain of Brundle, Arbiter of the cities, Magistrate of Shoal, Protector of the Realm, Queen Maldrin, Quirin Daranul, Dar Melimbre, 4th of her name. The herald threw the smaller manipulator arms that grew from its chest wide and bowed low by bending his main arms until Donaldson thought that it might fall over. Holding the low bow, he turned and walked backwards away from the entrance to the grand entrance hall. A formidable procession marched through the doorway, the Queen with the unmistakable centerpiece at the front. Robes in some form of regal cape trailed behind her, and a wide crown sat on her head. She cradled a scepter in her secondary arms, unlike her larger gorilla arms, which were each at least as big and round as Major's thighs. These arms were as thin and slender as his daughter's, and she is a skinny 8-year-old. He clenched his fists, resting the urge to shake his head while standing at attention. Was starting to forget I was in an alien world, but these guys are definitely alien. 4 arms, 4 eyes, 2 forward and 2 sides. Red eyes, iris and sclera. Weird. Everything else I've seen has looked like it could have been from Earth, but not these guys. The Keshmen all bowed low in a not quite kneeling curtsy that Donaldson looked frankly painful and difficult to maintain without a tail for the balance. The humans all remained standing, owning them several looks. Count Digine, the Queen said, spreading her manipulator arms wide. It is good to see that you are well. I feared the worst when these elves arrived with the new artifices. Your grace us with your presence, your majesty, and honor us with your concern, Digine said, slowly rising from his curtsy. The rest of his staff followed suit. But your fears can be allayed. These are not elves at all. They are a race called humans, who have arrived in Gala through a portal from another world, and they are in fact new allies in our mutual war. He turned, indicating the humans in turn. Your Majesty, may I introduce Ambassador Janitus Grayson of the United States of America, and Major Samuel Donaldson of the 1st Sergeant Michael Yu of the United States Army Rangers. They are here to establish an embassy of the United States with the city's alliance, and to begin the liaison of their forces with yours towards the joint prosecution of the war. She turned to assess the humans, narrowing all full of her small eyes, red eyes. You seek diplomatic relations and military alliance with us, yet you do not show deference to the rightful monarch of all Brundle. With all due respect, your majesty, Grayson said, giving the Queen a modest bow. We're Americans. We threw off the trappings of nobility centuries ago. We are a free nation of equals, and while we respect your traditions, we kneel for no one. I see. She turned back to the Keshman ambassador. It seems we have much to discuss, Count Digine. Might we retire to a private study for more comfortable conversation?
Certainly, Your Majesty.
Dychne bowed low.
I had the green room prepared when I heard of your arrival.
Donaldson was careful to not smirk or roll his eyes at that comment.
A few minutes, a brief security sweep, and a translation spell later, they all gathered around the green room's conference table once more. Only one staffer and one guard from each nation remained, standing quietly along the entrance wall. You dismissed, leaving the number of representatives at 2 for each nation. Too bad we couldn't swap places.
Now tie in,
Tsar Monombre said, settling into her chair and resting her manipulator arms on the table.
Tell me more about these nut owls we have here.
Dychne smiled, lightly flicking an ear. Well, Muldren, as they are here, I think it is best that they tell you themselves.
Yes.
She turned, and Donaldson got the sense of a skull in that front of her ball-like shape, but she mostly accomplished it by moving and turning her whole body.
Ambassador Grayson, I believe is how it is pronounced.
Yes, Your Majesty, she said.
Tell me, Ambassador, what are your people doing in Gala? How did you come here, and what are your intentions?
Well, we came here by no means of our own. It was Ganlan artificers who opened the portal to our world. She waved at Dychne and Ch.19.5. They didn't expect to find us, but they did. We are here, in the short term, to defeat the elves. Not only would they make terrible neighbors, by any comparison, unlike the kingdom of Ganlan, but we have seen their evil before, she frowned. Unfortunately, it was committed by us against ourselves long ago. We defeated it then, and we aim to defeat it now. There is no living peace with that evil.
We can certainly understand those sentiments.
Tsar Monombre trapped her nimble fingers on the table.
The elves have never been anything but cold and disdainful to us before the war, and they have been most vicious and cruel in their attacks since the war began.
She leaned forward, to her frontmost eyes locking on the human ambassador.
But what of after the war, assuming that we are victorious? What are your intentions then?
Trade, Grayson said, economic, technological, and cultural. We have much to offer each other. The United States does not desire unnecessary war, and we would much rather make friends and trading partners than enemies. Mutual prosperity is our goal.
An interesting prospect, I'm sure,
General Dalcroix said, folding his manipulator hands on the table. But the elves have locked us up in the Golden Pass as much as we have them, and have completely dominated the high seas, all while walking across the Kishman lands like they were the lords of the place. Even if you could double the forces that Ganlan could field at the beginning of the war, we still face a long slog ahead of us before we will be in any position to discuss secure or reliable trade.
With respect, High Lord,
Ch.19.5 bowed his head, his ears dipping low. The American military has crushed the elves at nearly every step, and they have inflicted a far greater toll for any losses that they have suffered. In just the last 4 months, we have reclaimed everything that we have lost in the last year and a half. Before we opened the portal, half of all the Kishman territory, Ganlan or otherwise, lay in elven hands. Now, we were to consolidate all of the spearheads of those advances to where they stood the day of our expedition departed. We would have reclaimed nearly a full quarter of the territory the elves controlled. Our Monombre and her general exchanged a glance, mostly by shifting their eyes and small movements of their bodies, before she locked eyes with the human ambassador.
And what do you bring to the occasion of war that has made such an impact?
Major, Grayson turned to him with a small wave of a hand. Air support, he said. Long-range artillery, modern firearms, mechanized infantry. Their magic gives them some advantages, but the way of fighting the elves and Kishman have been using was made obsolete in our world hundreds of years ago. We've enough ammo to spare, with resupplies already scheduled. We can arrange a demonstration for you, if you'll like. The artificers you arrived on, Dalcroix shifted, his whole body rolling slightly to the left. I can already imagine how they could revolutionize war. I'm curious to see what other weapons you have, and to compare our spellworks. Donaldson shared a look with Grayson. We don't have any spellworks to share, sir. Dalcroix rocked forward, his face dipping slightly at what Donaldson decided to take as a nod. I understand. I suppose we, too, would be reluctant to share such powerful spellcraft. Were we the ones in such a position of exclusivity? Perhaps in time. Grayson smiled. What Major Donaldson means, High Lord, is that we do not have any spell work. Until the portal opened, we did not know that magic existed at all. Sol Monombre rocked side by side. You do all of this with machinery? Yes, Your Majesty. The Queen rocked even harder. Galanto! They're machinists! Ha! She tapped her fingers on the table in rapid sequence, emphasizing her final words with the sharp raps. The contraptions of our own mechanists pale in comparison. But I always thought even the Quarrelendal waterworks only scratched the surface of what we might achieve. Dullcry rotated to face her, and Donaldson was suddenly reminded of the time that he and Aisha had discovered Maggie had inadvertently wandered into a candy store. Fascinating, Sir Mullenbury laughed. I apologize, but the concept is just starting to... She eyed Grayson. You're really from another world? It's perfectly fine, Your Majesty. Oh, please, call me Malden. We're in private, and you've given me no desire to stop you. We can set the ceremony aside here. Your Honor, me, Grayson said. You can call me Janet. Well then, Janet from another world. What is yours like? Donaldson exchanged a glance with Dullcry. Don't think either of us will be getting so familiar. Well, Earth is surprisingly very much like Gala. She glanced at Sienia. I suppose that shouldn't be a surprise. Ganon was looking for a new world to evacuate their people to. Of course, they'd pick one similar to theirs. But it's the first habitable world beyond our own that we have discovered. She turned back to Sir Mullenbury. All of the other planets in our solar system could never support life as we know it, and none of the ones we discovered beyond our own star, like Earth. Though we have found a couple that might be close. You talk as if traveling between worlds is commonplace. How many worlds have your people visited? Well, Grayson paused, tilting her head. Traveling to another planet isn't exactly a thing yet, at least not for people. We've sent people to our moon, and we've sent machines all across our solar system, and even flung a few probes out across the stars. But manned spaceflight is still very limited. She raised a hand, gesturing in the general direction of the air. We have plans to send people to a neighboring planet maybe within a decade or so, and we've long speculated about how we might travel the stars. But until a few months ago, the idea of actually doing it was just dreams and fantasy. Sir Mullenbury leaned forward. You talk as if traveling the stars is a real possibility. Well, yes. At least in theory, Grayson shrugged. Our technology isn't advanced enough to allow us to send people, or even our closest neighbor in our own star system, without the backing of national budgets. But 60 years ago we landed men on the moon with far less advanced technology. And that was just 60 years after our first powered aircraft. Another century or two, and we'd probably have people living all over the solar system. She laughed. And if even only a quarter of the possibilities our scientists are saying magic might allow end up panning out, we might have a colony on Mars, ships venturing out to the nearest star within a decade. Incredible. Sir Mullenbury rocked back. Maybe the legends of the Skyfarers of Colossanal are true after all. Grayston tilted her head. What do you mean? It's a myth, Dullcry said, waving his manipulator hands and rolling all four eyes. A very old one. And a popular one. Sir Mullenbury held up a hand, pointing a finger at him. If not popular to believe, but maybe there is something to it after all. She turned back to Grayson. According to legend, our people are not originally from Gala. The story goes that many thousands of years ago, we sailed through the stars in a great ship called the Klestrina. She waved a manipulator hand, a great ship that carried many thousands of Dolgra families, and sailed the skyways between stars. The exact reason why vary, but most accounts agree that they were fleeing from a great cataclysm. Unfortunately, Klestrina was damaged, either in that cataclysm or after, and barely reached the safety of this world before it came crashing down from the heavens. This is amazing, Grayson leaned forward. Does the wreckage still exist? She paused, chuckling to herself as she leaned back. I guess it wouldn't be just a legend if it did. Oh, I imagine it might, if time had not completed its work. Sir Mullenbury smiled. But Klestrina didn't crash here, in Brundle. According to legend, the great ship fell to the world on Bresh, the continent to our south, a dry and barren desert. She warbled slightly, shifting weight from main arm to main arm. Those who survived the catastrophe barely survived the wasteland, and it was only with great effort and sacrifice that our ancestors were able to build ships to sail across the sea to these lands we now call home. Settling back in her seat, she waved a manipulator hand at Grayson. The last part at least is true. Our people did travel across the deserts of the Bresh many thousands of years ago, before constructing ships and sailing north to our new homeland. Any record of the time before Bresh has long since been lost, however. All we have left are stories passed down from generation to generation. Dullcry rumbled.
and the Queen pulled back from the conversation. She smiled at Grayston. Plans for the future. We have wandered far off from our original subject of our dialogue. She took a breath. On the subject of war, we shall have to formalize our relationship, of course, and the cities will argue and debate the details at length. But for now, what are your plans and intentions? How might we work together? Donaldson leaned forward. Your Majesty, General, our mission is to act as advisors to your military, to coordinate your all's operations with ours, and to support you all in combat directly. Though I've only got a single company, so our manpower is limited. Our air bases are also still too far away to provide combat patrols for close air support with any regularity. But they are close enough that we can make planned airstrikes to support your fortresses, and any troops you send out to attack. If we plan it right, as we push back the Elves from the Gandon front, we'll be putting up a new air bases that'll bring our aircraft closer to your front, and eventually, we would like to move an additional forces out here to support you all. Help you all go on the offensive from your side. Dalcry rocked back. Going on the offensive? He waddled slightly side to side. There is always talk of doing that, but it hasn't been as serious in years. He looked at Tsar Molenbray. Your Majesty, with permission, I would like to assemble your own generals to meet with the Major Donaldson and discuss these matters in detail. He glanced at Donaldson. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after. You may command at your discretion, General Dalcry. You have my confidence. For your honor, Your Majesty, he said, dipping himself towards her before looking back to Donaldson. I'll send word to you by the end of the day for when and where we shall be meeting. I'll be ready, sir. And we must meet again, Janet. Tren, both formally and in private. Tsar Molenbray smiled at Grayson. I want to hear more of your world. That's why I'm here, Grayson said, returning her smile. The Queen stood, and everyone in the room followed suit. A pleasant an escape as this has been. I have important matters at court I was to address today, and they can only be put off for so long. Ambassadors, my voice shall speak to you to arrange a more formal meeting. We look forward to it, Your Majesty, Lynae said, his ears swinging to the side as he bowed low. Oh, before you all run off, Donaldson said, General, on our flight over the mountains, we spotted a squad of owls picking their way up the ridge. They looked to be scaling the mountains to cross them. Dalcry dipped forward in a nod. Yes, that would be one of their scouting parties. The mountains north of Grodeland Pass are too severe to allow the passage of any significant force, but small scouting parties can sometimes survive the journey. They send them over regularly, especially in the warmer months, to spy on us and cause whatever disruptions they can. He wobbled from main arm to main arm. They are rarely more than a minor nuisance. We thank you for the notice, however. I will ensure word is passed to the frontier states. They will enjoy the sport, Sal Molenbray smiled, giving Donaldson a better look with her teeth. There's more than just glimmering molars in there. Picking up her scepter, she waved a manipulator arm at Grayson and Lynae. I look forward to seeing you both again. Until then, good tidings to you. Good tidings to you, Grayson, Lynae, and Shinya echoed back. Roll tide, Donaldson said, owning himself a look from Grayson. With a final glance at him, the Queen turned for the exit, Dalcry falling in behind her. The doors were swung open for her, and the procession quickly formed around her as she departed the embassy. I like her, Grayson said when she was gone. And she likes you, Lynae said, which is good. You do not want her as an enemy. That goes without saying. She's the Queen, and we came here to make friends. He flicked an ear. More than that, she corralled, connived, and strong-armed the city's alliance into most cooperating and working together more than they ever had in their entire history. The common enemy of the Owls helped with that, but even that threat only unifies the Dulgra cities so much. Since taking the throne 18 years ago, she's survived disasters, political upheavals, 2 coup attempts, and since the war began, personally killed at least 3 assassins that I'm aware of. His ears twitched. The last one, all that was left of him, was the smoldering shoes. Donaldson raised an eyebrow. Roll tide! End of chapter. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Casper Arnholtz, Maxwell, Barkey, it's difficult to pronounce, Lord Azrekahl, and Arcadian.